Okay, good. Hello everyone, welcome to the final heartbeats. And we're not going to die tonight, but it's the last one in our series. Our guest tonight is Mathias. So the first question we always ask is like, can you describe a bit who you are, why you're sitting here probably as well, what you do in your daily life?
Okay, so hey, I'm Mathias and I work on V8 at Google. V8 is the JavaScript and WebAssembly engine that's being used as part of Google Chrome, but it's also being embedded in other applications like in Node.js, for example, also uses V8. It's very much a standalone project. It's not just a Chrome project. Everyone can take it and embed it in their own application, and it's being used all over the place. And specifically what I focus on within V8 is JavaScript, and specifically the evolution of the JavaScript language. So I work on TC39, the technical committee number 39, where people go and propose new features and new APIs and new syntax to be incorporated as part of the JavaScript language itself, so that it becomes available in web browsers and in Node.js and in all those other environments where JavaScript runs.
So you can wait with your feature request till the end of the session, okay?
Yes, please.
Cool. So before you worked at Google, you worked also at Opera, right?
Yeah.
And probably a lot of people are thinking like, how did this guy, Belgian guy, end up with working with Opera and then with Google? Like, did they just call you like, hey, come and work for us, or how did that go?
I'm still asking the same question myself, but yeah, basically I started working as a freelance front-end developer at the start of my career. So I worked on several projects for different clients, like various things. HTML, CSS, JavaScript, some backend development as well. But I found myself over the years taking more and more time off to work on kind of web standards and writing browser tests and discovering browser bugs and filing these bugs and then sometimes fixing them myself, stuff like that. So I found myself taking time off from paid client work just to do these things because I enjoyed them so much. And at some point, I guess I had been working with some people within Opera to do this kind of stuff. And they reached out to me and they were like, yeah, do you maybe want to interview? So I said yes. And so when the time came for the on-site interviews, there's a funny story, by the way. I've never told anyone about this. So this is a world premiere.
Give us a scoop.
So yeah, I mean, they flew me out to Oslo to visit the main office they had there. And so I was there for a whole day of interviews. And lunchtime came. So we went to the cafeteria. I've already had like 2 separate interviews with 2 different people who later turned out to be my manager and my manager's manager, just to set the scene there. And they have this cafeteria with like this huge buffet, and there's all this different kind of food, and you can just pick whatever you want. So okay, I take a plate and I start going around, and at some point I see something that looks like vegetables, and they're sliced into tiny pieces, but there's a little bit of funky sauce on top of them, and it kind of looked delicious, but I didn't know what it was. So I take some of these vegetables on my plate, and I move on. And yeah, we start eating. So I'm still joined by these people who had just interviewed me, my manager's manager. And it was somewhere around that time that I realized I was eating soup with a fork off of a plate. And everyone was too polite to say anything about it. And somehow I still got the job.
Still they hired you, okay.
That's why I'm still wondering how I ended up there.
That's a nice anecdote. So, I mean, maybe some people also know you here in Belgium for being involved in Frontiers, the Dutch/Belgian front-end developer association. Are you still involved in that, or are you involved in any other kind of thing like this?
I'm not currently involved in Frontiers anymore. I mean, I live in a different country now, so that's kind of a valid excuse, I think.
Yeah, of course.
But yeah, I was one of the people who helped get Frontiers off of the ground here in Belgium by starting to organize local meetups. We started by doing them every month, but then later it became kind of a different schedule. And I did that for a couple of years, but over time, some personal things in my life changed, and I didn't have the time anymore, unfortunately, to actively organize these myself. But I was very happy to see other people take over this work. And
you went to a Frontiers meetup yesterday, right?
Just yesterday, yeah. Cool. So it makes me very happy to see that just because I stopped organizing, other people are still doing this.
Yeah, that's very cool. And so what I mean, in the beginning, what driving you to actually be involved in this community thing?
Okay, so I guess this is something that has been driving a lot of what I do in my whole life, and it's about knowledge sharing, and not necessarily me sharing knowledge because I don't really know that much, but just if you get developers together in a room and you get them to talk to each other, there's always something that everyone in that room can learn from everyone else in that room, and that's really a fascinating concept to me.
Yeah, of course.
So a lot of things that I do, like organizing these Frontiers meetups, we also organize some workshops, but also things like attending conferences. All of that stuff is all around knowledge sharing to me. I think that's really powerful.
Cool. So now a bit into technical things. I mean, since you're working in JavaScript, I think I mean, it's pretty cool, right? These days we see like people using JavaScript for everything, right? I mean, the V8 I guess changed a lot, and also Node and all the things that came around. And for me personally, it annoys me that there is no real standard in it yet. Like when you have a PHP project, there's like the PHP standards, and you know that if you're going into a PHP project, you kind of know what to expect when in a good project. But in JavaScript, every time I encounter a JavaScript project, it's totally different, and it's really how the engineer that made it wanted to do it. Do you think there is one day going to be like a more standardized way of doing things?
So do you mean in terms of coding style?
Yeah, coding style, standards, like how I mean, if
folder structure, that kind of, okay, like everything.
Like, there's one thing that you have is the packages of JSON and a node_modules folder, and that's probably the only thing, and maybe an app.js kind of thing. But
yeah, I actually consider that to be a good thing, that people have the freedom to kind of make up their own mind, and like, I understand that it's difficult if you work on lots of different projects with other people and other contributors, then maybe all of them have different styles. But I found myself over the years, that's just something you get used to. And things have actually gotten better lately with things like editor config. There's like a dot file that you can add to your project, and then most modern editors have a plugin, or they support this out of the box, so they automatically switch the settings when it comes to things like tabs versus spaces. So you don't really have to think about that anymore. And when it comes to actual coding style and like formatting, that kind of stuff, there's a project called Prettier, for example.
Yeah, we use it a lot,
Yeah, I imagine over time we will see more and more projects and more people using this. And you could actually completely automate this whole thing. Like if you have a preferred style that you feel strongly about, you could clone any repository, apply Prettier with your config to it, and then when you want to contribute back, you can apply their config and then merge it back. And you can automate all of this. You don't have to think about it.
I think Maxim, one of our co-workers, he wrote a blog post about using Prettier with PHP. So that also works.
There you go. I didn't even know it supported PHP as well. It supports all these languages.
I don't think it supports PHP, but they forced it to do so.
Oh, wow. Awesome.
You can find it on our blog if you want to read it.
Did you know it supports Markdown as well? So if you have like tables, it will nicely format them and align them like ASCII art style. It's really cool.
Cool. Actually, you're talking about an editor config file, which is a dot file. I was talking with someone like Mathias is coming, and he's like, "Is that the guy from the dot files, right?"
Yes, I invented dot files.
No, you didn't invent it. But that's I mean,
that's me.
That's still something. I mean, do a lot of people like know you also for that? I mean, do you get a lot of people talking to you about the dot files, or is that still?
So surprisingly, yes. No. For some reason, that GitHub repository of mine got pretty popular. I think it was because I mean, there's nothing really too special about my particular set of dot files. I think it's just a collection of things that I stumbled across over the years, or like snippets that I wrote. But I think the thing that I was the first person to do was I collected all these default write commands that you can use on a Mac to kind of configure your entire system in an automated way. So when I have a new Mac, for example, all I have to do is just run this one script, and like I don't have to go to system preferences and check all the boxes one by one. And a lot of people seem to like specifically that file. So
how many times in a year do you have a new Mac?
Yeah, it's not really a problem worth optimizing for.
For me, I've seen the dot files. I've seen also things like what it called Homebrew and then Cask or something. Right. For me, I've never had like the thing like, why do I actually need to do this? Because it happens like once in like 3 years. I have a new computer, but a lot of people apparently like it doing it, right? There's a lot of people in our team also using it. So
there's something. It feels like meditation where you kind of you figure out what the command is.
The default writes I use as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Oh,
cool.
There you go.
So since you're a web standards enthusiast, like, what do you think about the tendency to like put everything in JavaScript? And like talking about CSS in JavaScript, JSX kind of stuff.
Right. Yeah.
Doesn't that a bit contradict like the web standards?
I think it kind of goes back to the same point as before, where it's a really good thing that JavaScript gives people all these ideas and the freedom to solve them in the way they like. Like for example, CSS in JS is not it doesn't really solve a problem that I am personally having. But if it helps people write code more quickly or write code that they think is more maintainable, then that's great for them. I don't see why they shouldn't be able to do so. No. And JSX is an interesting one because it's not really JavaScript,
Yeah.
but it compiles down to something that is JavaScript.
Yeah.
So it's just a developer convenience. But if the question is, should we make JSX part of the JavaScript standards? I don't think we should do that.
Yes, of
it
course.
makes sense for that, for the React team to figure all that out, and if they want to make changes there, they can still do it.
I think this week someone of our team shared a blog post on Medium about they now have a CSS prop in React, and I was thinking, what's the difference with style? Probably I didn't really understood it, but what's the difference with the style parameter that we used to have in HTML? That was my question.
Oh.
Okay, so sometimes. Sorry for that. So this is a question from someone in our team. I'm going to try to read it. It's a long question. Yeah, so we are using like the traditional languages like HTML, CSS, and JavaScript to write applications. There is also things like WebAssembly. You mentioned it before coming up. Do you think that we will change to using that as a default in the near future, or do you think that we'll always have like this standard thing that we have for like the last 25 or even almost 30 years?
That's a really good question. I think a lot of people seem to think that WebAssembly is here to replace JavaScript or replace some of those other things that we've been using, and that's not what it's about. That's not what you should use it for. It actually goes very well together with all these other technologies. But when it comes to web development, you still want to start out from the basics of HTML for the content, CSS for styling, JavaScript for some interaction. And the cool thing about WebAssembly is that if you have a code base lying around that is written in C or Rust or C++, then you can bring it to the web where that wasn't possible before.
Okay.
And this is something that we've seen happening with AutoCAD, for example. Like, this is literally a 30-year-old code base. They put some engineers on it. They made some changes to their code base to make it possible to turn that into a WebAssembly module. And nowadays, you can just go to a website and open this thing that you used to have like several CD-ROMs, and you had to install it, and then you can run the app.
Cool.
So I think we will see more of that happening.
So that's what also is like what you guys think it should be used for, because of course people are going to also force it to do some other things, I guess.
Yeah, sure. I think WebAssembly, it's so powerful that there's probably things that no one has ever thought of yet that we will see people using it for in the next couple of years. Like one extreme example would be nowadays, if you write JavaScript, you have to worry about cross-browser support, and like maybe you want to use a new JavaScript feature, but it's not yet supported in all the browsers. So nowadays we use transpilation to solve that. But yeah, I mean, it makes sense. It's a good thing to transpile.
Yeah, it reminds me a bit of the old Flash days, like where you have like
exactly like I mean,
works
it
on
wouldn't
everything,
be
right?
unreasonable for someone to take, like if you have the Flash runtime, if you have the source code, if you're Adobe, then you could turn that into a WebAssembly module.
Please don't.
I mean, if you have a legacy website, then this is the way to make it work without requiring people to install a shady plugin.
Yeah.
So there are use cases like that that are possible. I'm not saying they're always good ideas, but it opens up a lot of opportunities.
Yeah, of course.
Maybe a better example is, let's say you want to use video on the web. And with HTML5 video, a problem was that you had to wait for all browsers to support all the codecs that you wanted to provide to people. And that was very painful at the time. So you had to re-encode your video 4 times just to make sure you had cross-browser support. But nowadays, you could use any codec, ship the codec to the browser using WebAssembly, and then just do the decoding yourself. You don't have to wait for everyone to support all those codecs.
Cool. That's also going to be probably for, I mean, if we talk about video, also for like encryption and stuff, that's going to be like copyright stuff. And I never thought about it like that. Okay, cool. You talked already about the fact that you need to, like with JavaScript, you need to support like different browsers, but in the end, we're not going to end up with Chromium in every browser. Like Microsoft announced a couple of weeks ago that they're going to use Chromium as well for Edge, as far as I understood. So, do you think that's a good thing? And also, the second question is, do you think that will slow down the speed of which browsers evolve?
I seriously hope that there will always be multiple browser vendors and multiple rendering engines. By the time I joined Opera, they had just decided to switch from their own engine to Chromium. And the same thing is happening now with Edge. So I've been there on the other side as well. And there's good news to it as well, because for web developers, it means it's one less compatibility problem to worry about. And then your second question was, will it slow down the development of browsers?
Because now we're always
looking at
Google for
competition. I don't think that will happen. If anything, we will see more development on the Chromium side of things, because Microsoft has publicly stated that they intend to not just take Chromium, they want to contribute back to it, cool. Which I'm really excited about. We will have to see what happens, of course, but I think we might actually get some awesome contributions for them.
Okay, very nice. So you're also developer relations at Chromium?
Yes, that's part of what I do, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, we also had a couple of our colleagues leaving us for being a developer relationships person at another company, and I always think like when our people go to talk at conferences, they give their own talks and they just do whatever they want, and sometimes they put a logo on it, but it's not really necessary. As you are representing Google, doesn't that really annoy you that you always have to be that you're like Mathias from Google, or are you there as yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think about it that way. Okay. I have complete freedom to talk about whatever I want to talk about. I just happen to talk about JavaScript stuff because that's what I want to talk about anyway. Yeah. And like, if I look at the stuff that I'm doing now, when I get up on a stage, it's still the same thing that I was doing back at Opera. It's still the same stuff that I was talking about before I was even at Opera. I've been doing this for a long time, and yeah, it's just I end up getting a salary from different employers. But
yeah, and what kind of things do you talk about these days?
I'm mostly focused on JavaScript as a language. So I'm talking about new JavaScript features that are coming to the language, or I talk about implementation details in V8 to get JavaScript developers a better understanding of how their code will run behind the scenes and how what we do to make it fast, basically.
Cool. Do you talk a lot?
I'm trying to cut down on it. I mean, there's a lot of travel involved with it, and it gets tiresome.
It's like how many times in a month do you? I think it's very interesting to know for like from a developer relations person from Google to understand like how that really works, that process.
I mean, it's really up to myself. Like I get to decide.
They send you like there is someone needed there, and then you can just pick where you go, or is it?
Not really. It's more like people invite me to go to conferences, and then I say yes or no depending on whether I want to, whether I have time. But I think it's important, at least for what I want to do, that I don't spend all of my time at conferences. I want to write actual code as well. I want to do other stuff.
Yeah, that's something I always ask myself. Like these people, I've done that also. Like in 2008, I've done a lot of conferences, and then you see the same people everywhere, like the same speakers. And I ask myself, like,
it's fun.
Do they actually know what they're talking about, or are they just giving like this presentation?
Oh, okay. I haven't thought of it that way.
Yeah. I mean, for you, I mean, clearly, if you still touch code, definitely you know what you're talking about. But there's a lot of people also that I think like they're just like touring and getting the money from the public speaking, and not really.
I mean, and there's nothing wrong with that.
No, of course not. No.
Yeah, I personally think it's important that I definitely want to feel like I know what I'm talking about, and I think there's a balance.
So, I mean, being a developer relations at Google, like, does that mean also that there's people like supporting you in that internally from Google? Like, do you get some coaching on that? Does some people help you with your styling of your slides and stuff like that?
I haven't personally made use of that, but we do have internal programs where like other Googlers can help you out with stuff. Oh, that's cool. And something we do with the wider team is if you create something new, like maybe you write a blog post or something, or maybe you prepare some slides, then you can send it around to the whole team and people leave comments on it. We use Google Docs and Google Slides for all this stuff, so people can use comments.
Are you going to?
I'm not pitching this. I'm just saying, like.
Do you present with Google Slides as well?
Mostly not.
Because you're using.
You know why?
Yeah. No.
Because they don't support emoji in full screen mode.
Really?
So I usually make my slides in Google Slides, and then I export them and import them into Keynote, because that way the emoji work. Emoji are really important for me.
And when are they going to solve that?
I mean, there's an internal bug, and I keep pinging it every now and then, but we'll see what happens.
Maybe you can make a JavaScript script that like pings it every day or something. So, in our team also, we think highly about public speaking, and we really try to have everyone also to practice this. Like every year at our team retreat, everyone needs to give a presentation. And do you have any like quick tips for people like how to become a public speaker or how to get better on it?
Oh, okay. I don't really have a formula to success or anything. I don't really consider myself to be all that successful. But what worked for me personally is just starting small. And if you want to do more public speaking, by all means, start by attending meetups, attending local meetups. They're always looking for new speakers.
Yeah, we talk
From
a lot.
my experience as an organizer, I know that this is the hardest part in organizing a meetup. It's finding speakers.
Yeah.
So don't hesitate to step up and say, I want to talk about something, even if it's just a 5-minute lightning talk about some problem you solved that week. That's perfect. Like, just go for it.
I mean, a lot of the meetups in Belgium, we already have been there, and it's a problem finding speakers, and it's sad that not a lot of companies like encourage also their people to actually share the knowledge. Do you have any, like, because I mean, meetups is one thing that's pretty easy to get in. How do you get in on conferences? Like, before you were at Opera and Google, how did you actually manage to get on a conference stage? Submitting RFPs, or did people actually reach out and
I think my first conference happened because someone invited me to speak at their conference after they saw one of my talks at a local meetup.
Okay,
so for me, that was kind of the onboarding strategy.
Did you do really meetups outside of Belgium as well?
No,
okay.
I hadn't done that. Except maybe I think there was one Frontiers meetup in the Netherlands, which is close enough. Yeah. It doesn't really count.
Yeah, no, that's cool. So there was one question. I mean, we discussed the questions a bit up front, and we have like this one question we ask everyone, and you didn't want me to ask it, but I'm going to ask it anyway. If you compare the world today with 10 years ago, because Made with Love exists 10 years this year, that's also why we're doing these sessions, what do you think is the biggest difference?
Yeah, the reason I didn't like this question, or at least not answering it in this public forum, is because it's very hard to not get political about this. So I'm going to try not to get political and talk about technology instead.
That's perfect.
Yeah, I mean, I think between 10 years ago and today, a big difference is that we're using mobile apps more often, and like web apps have now become almost equivalent to mobile apps. And I think the same thing will start to happen on the desktop as well, where we have like a website and a desktop app. There are already projects that kind of blur the lines, like with Electron, but I think over the next couple of years, we won't need Electron anymore for the majority of use cases. It will just be a web app that you browse to, and you click install, and that's it, you have the app in your system.
That's what Google tries to do with the apps you can install from Chrome, right?
Yeah, like at the home screen, like you have it on different browsers, on your mobile device already, but I don't think it really works on desktop yet, and I think that is starting to happen now.
Yeah, there's like with the push notifications now, and so it's like really coming.
Yeah, and sure, there's still missing capabilities that native apps already have that we still need to figure out for the web, because the security model is just completely different, so we have to be extra careful there. But I think over time, more and more.
There's like crazy stuff, like you can use USB now in the browser and stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly, like Bluetooth, no problem.
Bluetooth, really?
Yeah, there's an API for that. I remember when the first Star Wars movie came out with the BB-8 droid.
I don't know anything about movies, but
yeah.
Probably other people do.
I bought this.
Go ahead.
I bought this toy, which is like a little BB-8 droid, and you could remote control it with a mobile app. So I spent some time reverse engineering the app by using Wireshark and sniffing like the Bluetooth traffic between it. And then I used the web Bluetooth API to create a web app out of it. So I could control it, just browse the website, and then I could connect to my droids, give permission, and then control it with the web. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. That's nice. Yeah, those kind of crazy things, I guess, will happen more and more. So if I ask you the same question in 10 years, what do you think will have changed? Let's say in the same area, like how do you see like what the technology evolve in the next 10 years?
I really can't say, man. We'll have to wait and see.
No. Okay. Cool. Then that's the official questions part, right? So thanks for that already.
Sure.
If there are any other questions or feature requests, you can you can start asking them now. We're going to give a microphone because there's also people remotely watching us, so that's why we need a microphone.
It was an interesting conversation so far. One of the things that I started wondering is like, what is like the most difficult problem that you're struggling with right now? Like something that you're tackling right now in the V8 engine, or what is like your nemesis in the V8 code base?
Are you asking specifically about V8 or about working on the JavaScript language, or? Because there's like some ongoing demons that I'm struggling with. Talk about,
like both, like all of them. Like what is
all of them. Okay.
What is causing you pain in your daily work?
Only two. Well, when it comes to standardization, the hardest part is actually web compatibility, because very often there's like a new feature that someone thinks up. Maybe it's a new API, and we get to almost the final stage where browsers start to implement it and then ship it to the web, and only then we realize that, oh look, when we ship this, this website breaks and this website breaks as well. So we can't actually ship this without breaking the web. And that means we have to go back to the drawing board and make some kind of change to fix it. And this happened quite recently. Maybe some of you have seen it with the array flatten proposal. So there was an array method called flatten that we wanted to add. Mozilla was the first to ship that, and yeah, it instantly broke a lot of websites because of some old MooTools version, which did something funky. I wrote a blog post about it if you're interested in the details, but it turns out we couldn't ship flatten. We had to find a new name.
One day you'll have to stop being backward compatible because we're not going to be able to support internet for, MooTools for another 100 years, right?
That's the thing. It's not about supporting MooTools. It's about supporting the web. Like, no browser is going to want to ship something that they know is breaking websites, especially popular websites, because that gives other browsers a compatible advantage, competitive advantage.
Yeah.
Sorry. And we just cannot do that to our users as well.
No, I understand. Yeah, cool.
So facing legacy is what I hear.
Yes, legacy.
Nice.
And there's always so many unexpected ways where JavaScript developers are writing code in ways that you never imagined.
Cool.
Continuing on that, how do you feel about Flash becoming unsupported in the future? Because it breaks a lot of the web. Older websites, obviously, but still, it's like it has historic meaning, I think.
Right. I agree that there is historic value to preserving this content, and that's where I think something like WebAssembly could actually help, potentially. If someone were to create a WebAssembly version of the Flash player, we could use that to kind of restore that content, or at least make it accessible. And there's already actually a JavaScript project called Shumway, I think, that the Mozilla people have been working on. It's already a couple of years old. So it's a JavaScript implementation of some kind of Flash player. I don't think it supports the whole spectrum of everything that's possible in Swift files. But yeah, you can use it to kind of emulate the Flash player to some extent.
People are crazy.
Yeah, so I think it's a good thing that Flash went away because it's just not open. It's not really part of the web if it's not standardized and if it's not open. And something like WebAssembly, it's a fully specified format. Everyone can look at the spec and completely implement it in a way that it's interoperable with other implementations. And that's just something you cannot say about Flash. And for that reason, I think it's a good thing that people are using standards now as opposed to some proprietary plugin-based thing.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Any other questions?
Yes, a question from Brazil, from Caio, about mobile apps and PWA. In your opinion, is it just a hype thing, or will it actually be something in the future? So mobile apps and PWA.
I think it already is something, personally. But yeah, I think we will start to see more and more of these PWAs over time. I think a lot of people are realizing now that it makes more sense to invest in building one good website that works on mobile devices as well, that you can then take and very easily turn into a PWA, which is basically just adding some kind of service worker, adding a manifest file, and using HTTPS. That's all it takes. And in my opinion, all three of those things should really be the default for any website that is built today. It doesn't really take that much effort on top of what you're already doing anyway if you're building a website. So yes, to that question, I think we will see more and more PWAs.
Yeah.
Good question, Yannick.
You talked earlier about, you mentioned a couple of times like the Mozilla people. Since like Microsoft is now moving towards the Chromium, I think there's like at this point 2 major browser rendering engines, maybe Safari as well.
Yeah.
So three that are common. How is that cooperation working? Is this like a healthy competition? Is this like, are you feeling like you're working against each other or with each other? Like, how is that dynamic going?
That's a good question. In the kind of work that I do, I mostly focus on standardization. And there we have a very good collaboration with other browser vendors and even with other companies that are heavy users of the JavaScript language. So when it comes to TC39, where the evolution of the JavaScript language is being decided, basically, there's lots of members which are not just browser vendors, but also companies like GitHub were there. Well, I guess GitHub is now also Microsoft. But Facebook, for example, is also a member. They're heavy users of JavaScript, so it makes sense. They have probably a very good idea of the kind of features that are still missing from the language. So I'm actually happy that they're part of the TC39 as well.
We also use JavaScript. Maybe we can join the.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, between you and me, it's pretty costly.
Okay.
But yeah.
I'm sure we can get a discount.
This is actually part of the reason why I attend these meetings, because I think I used to be a web developer myself, so I think I have the background that I need to kind of represent everyone there.
So you're saying me that like making the web standards, you have to pay to be involved in it?
For TC39 specifically, yeah, that's how it works. Unfortunately,
Yeah,
there is a
strange.
workaround. There is a workaround.
Tell me
like,
about it.
So the first, I mean, this is not live streamed or
No,
anything,
no,
right?
no,
So I attended my very first TC39 meeting in I think 2014, and this was before I joined Opera, which was a member, so that would have solved the problem. And I made it in because someone on the committee invited me, and at the time the jQuery Foundation, which is today the JavaScript Foundation, they became a paying member. So they basically can invite people and say, oh yeah, they're here representing us. And then
So you could
the
invite
bureaucrats
me.
in charge of everything, they say, okay, it's fine.
No, I'm joking. Cool, I don't know anything about JavaScript, so.
But
Alert, yes, that's what I can do.
But the good news is that you don't actually have to attend the meetings
Yeah, of
to
course.
contribute. Everything is happening out in the open nowadays, which is a major improvement compared to the ES5 days, because maybe some of you don't know this, but the ECMAScript spec, so the JavaScript standard, it used to be a Word document. So if you wanted to check out the new version, there was like an annotated version of the Word document which had like the inline diffs in there. So you had to check the Word annotations to figure out what changed, and that was horrible. Nowadays, everything is happening on GitHub. There's a separate repository for every language proposal individually. So if you want to get involved, that's the perfect place to start.
Okay. Any more questions? There's one over there.
So I'm wondering
Wait for the microphone.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So I'm wondering, what type of coding do you still do today? Like, can you describe the types of?
It's a little bit of everything. I implement some of these features in V8 myself. So when I work on V8, it's mostly about implementing new language features. So array flatten, which was then renamed to flat. That was the problem solver, apparently. Renaming it to flat worked. I implemented that. I implemented array flat map as well. I implemented global this recently. I implement some random things.
And which language do you use to implement those?
That's an interesting question because we use multiple different languages. But most of it is C++. But at this point, we have multiple DSLs on top of that to simplify some things. I mostly do not have to deal with those parts of the code base too much. But we have one thing called the code stub assembler, which is an abstraction on top of machine code, because we need to support, I think, 9 different architectures at this point. Previously, engineers were writing these machine code by hand for every little optimization that we had in there for all these 9 little different architectures. It was insane. And then we created this DSL on top. So now we can write it in one language, and it automatically gets translated.
Cool.
And now we have a DSL on top of the DSL.
And then you end up with legacy. Okay. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Cool. Any more questions?
Yeah, we've seen a lot of new features coming to both V8 and also TC39. Do you guys have like an uphill battle with all of the feature requests, because there's a lot of stuff going on, people want more and more into JavaScript? I can assume that from you nodding that it definitely is an uphill battle.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's a good thing. It should be hard to add something new to the language, because once you add it in and it ships in browsers, there's no way you can ever remove it. We'll be stuck with it forever. So we need to make sure that we make the right decisions. And this is also why there's nowadays we have a staging process with there's 5 stages. It started at stage 0, where someone comes up with a proposal for a problem they want to solve. Then, there's more stages, but basically only when it gets to stage 4, at the very end, when there's already shipping implementations in browsers, at that point, it can become part of the official spec. And so during the whole process, you need to identify any cross-cutting concerns that you may have with the existing standard, with existing code on the web, where possible as well. This is why we need code to ship in browsers before we make it part of the spec, because otherwise we wouldn't have detected the whole flatten issue, for example. So it is hard, but I think that's for the betterment of the language.
What's like the craziest request that you got, of kind of feature in JavaScript that you didn't implement or that didn't make it? Any funny stories to be told there?
I mean, every request is valuable, because the thing is, a lot of people, they come to a TC39 or they make a proposal somewhere and they say, oh, I want this particular syntax, or I want this API, and this is exactly how it should work. But that's not the optimal way of approaching the problem. It's much better to say, look, I'm having this problem.
Yeah, of course.
And then based on the problem, you can start to think of the use case and maybe think of other use cases and then design the solution based on those things. So it's better not to start with the solution, but rather with the problem and then discuss that with more people.
Okay, cool. Another question?
Yeah, I was wondering what the synergy is like between the V8 team and then the Node core team, because they're a big user of V8, and I know that it's been a very painful sort of partnership in the past.
Yeah,
like
that is
things
true.
have definitely improved. I know that, but like, can you maybe talk about where you guys are right now? Like, what's the communication? Things like new features like Big Int get into Node core really fast. I'm just wondering, like, how does that work?
Sure. So one major thing that happened last year, I guess it's already a year and a half ago now, is that previously we had tests for every patch that we make for V8. We have bots, so it runs on all these different architectures that we support, and we make sure that we don't break anything, right, before we merge it in. And a year and a half ago, we added Node.js specific bots to these tests. So basically, you cannot land a single patch into V8 if doing so would also break Node.js. So previously, we were only doing this for Chrome. And now we actually recognize that Node is also a first-class citizen and a first-class embedder of the V8 engine. So that's I think, a real big step forward that we made there. And in terms of the communication, some V8 team members are part of the Node.js steering groups. I don't know the correct names exactly of these groups, but yeah. Their meetings are all happening out in the open. They live stream them on YouTube, so everyone can follow along. Everything is happening on GitHub, of course, so people can participate in discussions there. And usually, when it comes to features landing in Node.js, they kind of decide on their own when they want to update their V8 version. Then they automatically get language features for free. So we leave that up to them. Sometimes there's an issue, and then we help them out.
Cool. There's a question behind you.
I think this will end up in a bit in an open question, but do you think that TC39, the ECMAScript standard will be too big because there are many features that get dripped in the standard?
I think that shouldn't be a concern for us as people who make the spec bigger, essentially, because the end goal is making JavaScript a better language for developers. And we see that a lot of people are coming to JavaScript as a language from lots of other diverse backgrounds and different computing languages, programming languages. Wow, I'm starting to, what's in this water? No. So we see a lot of proposals coming from people with a functional programming background, and those proposals are completely different from people with different backgrounds. But it's important that we recognize that people are using JavaScript in all these different ways, and we don't want to reject features just because not everyone will use them, because that's not the goal of a feature.
It will be a pain for implementers because I've worked on the Uglify.js and ECMAScript 6 was quite big.
Yeah, I agree. I think nowadays the process is a little better because in terms of the versioned updates to the spec, there's a new release every year. Yeah. So with ES6 it took like multiple years and it was just way too big. I completely agree there. Yeah. But for all kinds of tooling, I think the version number of the spec doesn't really matter. It's all about individual features and whether they ship or not in browsers. So I think tools should not say, oh, we want to support everything that's in ES 2018 or whatever. They should say, okay, there's a new proposal. It's at stage 3, so maybe we should start adding support to our tool.
Okay.
So you have to start watching on a proposal level instead of like the release level, basically.
Yeah, I think the two go a little bit hand in hand because stage 3 is also when things can start to ship in browsers. So I think it makes sense to wait until it ships in at least one browser.
But you said that the spec is only updated when it gets in all the browsers, so that actually means you have to really start looking at like the stage 3 things instead of like the actual releases of the language.
So when the proposal gets to stage 3, that's when browsers can start to implement things. They give implementer feedback sometimes that requires changes to the proposal. And then once there's at least 2 implementations, it can get to stage 4 during a meeting. And at that point, it will be merged into the main spec. Yeah. But I'm saying that developers should not really care about the stage 4 part because what really matters to them is whether it works in a browser or not, or whether it works in Node or not. It doesn't matter whether it's stage 3 or 4.
Okay, clear. There's more questions here in the front.
Over the years, we've seen a couple of crazy things happening in a browser. I've had several colleagues give talks on Web Audio API. You talked about Web Bluetooth API. what's the next big thing coming to the web browser?
I think WebAssembly might be one of them because of all the capabilities that just weren't possible before and all these new things that it brings to the web. There's completely new experiences that people can create that just weren't possible before on the web. And with WebAssembly, you can take an existing code base and just turn it into a WebAssembly module, and now suddenly you have something that runs in the browser. So I can imagine like very power-intensive games, for example. You no longer have to download an application and update it manually every time you want to play it. You could just go to a website. Sure, maybe it would still need to load all the files, which would be several megabytes, but for a game that would be okay, right? So I think WebAssembly might be a game changer in ways that many people still haven't thought of.
Is it also like useful for like very, very old legacy applications, like in big corporates that probably still like have to use Windows XP and stuff like that? Can you also use those kind of code bases and then port them in the web with WebAssembly?
It depends on the language that the code base is written in.
Course,
right now, C and C++ and Rust supports compiling down to WebAssembly modules, but I know other popular languages are working on supporting WebAssembly as an output format as well.
So probably it's going to be a solution for a lot of those kind of
I think that might happen, yeah.
That's cool, that's pretty neat.
I can't wait for my VB6 applications to run in the web browser.
Yeah, man.
Messagebox.show, WebAssembly, yay.
Any other questions? No? Oh, there's one in front here.
I was wondering what a typical TC39 meeting looks like. Do you guys just open up GitHub, go through issues, then triage? You have a Trello board? I'm very curious like how that works.
To everyone thinking, oh, that sounds really boring, it's actually more boring than that. Well, there's always a very strict agenda up front. So there's this document on GitHub. It's public, by the way. The repository is tc39/agendas. Then you can look up all the agendas for each month. The next meeting is next month in January. So you can see what's already on there. And we just go through the agenda item by item. And there is a structure to it. Like first, there's always an update from the ECMA secretariat who are organizing the whole thing. Then there's some administrative updates. And then we start going through the proposals, basically. And recently, we made some changes there. Previously, it was just kind of a random order. Like everyone who put something on the agenda, it would just appear in the order that they added it. But nowadays, we handle new proposals together. We handle stage 3 proposals together because arguably, stage 3 proposals are a little bit more pressing because they can start shipping in browsers. So I recommend everyone to check out the GitHub repository if you're interested in that.
Are those physical meetings or are they online?
They're physical meetings, yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
So they fly everyone in?
Well, you fly in yourself,
yeah,
right? You have to pay for it yourself, unfortunately. I mean, you can also dial in if you're a TC39 member, if you work for a company that is a paying member, basically. But all the real work is really happening on the GitHub out in the open in front of everyone.
It's funny to see, I mean, people working on web standards and everything still flying to a physical location to have a meeting about something virtual. Yeah,
it's just there's a lot of different stakeholders in TC39, and nowadays we have easily 70 people attending each and every meeting.
Oh wow!
And I mean, not everyone has the time or
And how
to check
do you
GitHub
do
all
a
the
meeting
time.
with 70 people?
Yeah, we've gotten a lot better at that as well. We have like an official time box now. We have a web app that we use, which is the queue. So someone is presenting, you see what the current presented item is, and then if you want to ask a question, there's like an interface where you can say, oh, I have a clarifying question, or I have a point of order, which takes precedence over the other thing. And like it's very structured. It's really nice.
So it's not really like a meeting. Like it's more like maybe like a parliament where like someone is presenting something and then other people can interact with that.
Now that you mention it, it is kind of like that, yeah.
Just to get an idea how it works. I mean,
yeah.
You're making probably like important decisions also for the work we do. So it's interesting to understand how that actually works. I was like thinking like it's a meeting with like 10 people or something, and no, but it's like
no, yeah, it's gotten a lot bigger.
Wow. Okay, yeah.
And something interesting happened at the latest meeting, which was the first time this ever happened. There were not enough items on the agenda to fill the whole 3 days because there were always.
It takes 3 days. Wow.
3 days meeting, yeah 3 days meetings. Which makes it worth the travel. If it was only 1 day, then maybe
then
not
also
as many people would
that
come.
justifies in it, yeah.
Yeah. So for basically the 3rd day, we didn't have agenda items. So what people ended up doing was a bar camp style unconference thing where you could group up with some people in smaller groups and then discuss specific proposals and solve open issues there.
Yeah.
And that was actually super valuable. We
Yeah, I
should do
can
more of
imagine.
that.
Yeah. That's
So
freewheeling.
I'm hoping the agenda stays empty.
We can. Any other questions?
So V8 is quite performant. How do you guys measure performance? How do you guys know it's performant enough, especially because there's so many languages involved?
That's a really good question, and over time, actually, the answer changed quite a bit. So you may have heard of these old school benchmarks like SunSpider or Dromeo that all browsers were basically using to optimize for these benchmarks. The problem with these benchmarks is that they were kind of synthetic micro benchmarks. I mean, someone wrote them knowing that, okay, I'm going to write some benchmark code. I'm going to do some weird stuff with JavaScript, and then browsers will make it fast. And for years, that's what we did. But nowadays, like a couple of years ago, the V8 team realized that it actually makes more sense to optimize for real-world performance. You want to make the code that developers write fast. You don't want to optimize for some benchmark that no one really uses in the real world. So since then, we shifted our focus to benchmarks like Speedometer, which is not a synthetic micro benchmark, but it actually uses popular frameworks and libraries like React and Preact and Angular and all those other things. It has a test case that uses Babel transpiled code and then the same code without transpilation in vanilla ES 2015. And every test that it has is a to-do MVC app. It's like an open source GitHub project.
Yeah, we know it.
So, I mean, of course, it's still a proxy, but we think this is a pretty good approximation for the code that is out there in the real world.
Yeah, of course.
And we actually have metrics on that as well, because we have an internal, like a Google internal top 25 benchmark with like some of the most popular websites out there in the world. We have snapshots of those, and we continuously benchmark against those. And whenever we make improvements based on Speedometer, we see these reflected in the real-world benchmark as well. And that's why we know why Speedometer actually matters.
Cool.
So the answer used to be optimize for whatever micro benchmark you could find, and there is some value in that, sure. But the real answer is optimize for the code that developers produce today. And we've gotten a lot better there.
And do you also there is like very popular websites like Facebook and of course Google itself and Google Apps and whatever. Do you also like really benchmarks like on how it performs in those environments, or is it really only on like you say, like with some?
So this top 25 benchmark may or may not contain some of the websites you just mentioned.
Okay, well, that answers my question.
But
that makes sense.
To be very clear, the goal is not to make those specific websites fast. It's just to get some idea of how well we're doing.
Probably even if you
websites that are
manage
popular.
to reduce the power consumption of Facebook with 5%, you're already doing something for global warming, right?
Sure, yeah, that's true. But yeah, we do try to make things better for everyone, not just people using Facebook.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Cool. There's more questions?
I was wondering if you were involved with the migration from Crankshaft to Ignition and Turbofan. Is there still some fallout from that, or like what was that like?
Yeah, that was around the time that I joined, actually. So I can't take credit for any of the implementation work that happened there. This was a year-long process. But yeah, so I think it was Chrome 59, which is almost 2 years ago when it launched. We shipped this entirely new pipeline with a new interpreter called Ignition, and then Turbofan, which is the optimizer compiler, which replaced Crankshaft. And I wouldn't say there's still technical fallout from that, because like we've replaced the whole thing and all the old code is gone now and things are great. Node is using it, performance got better for everyone. But I think in developers' hearts and minds, there's still some misinformation there because of Crankshaft. So for example, we had a lot of problems with Crankshaft, our old optimizing compiler. So when you have a function that had a try-catch in it, for example, we wouldn't be able to optimize that entire function just because of that one try-catch. We just couldn't do it. And now in Turbofan, this is not a problem anymore. We can optimize modern language features, and try-catch is not even special anymore. But still, I see a lot of people, they think, oh yeah, try-catch is bad for performance somehow, so I'm going to avoid it. And things have changed, really. Like, there's a lot of Crankshaft-specific performance advice that it kind of got ingrained in developers' coding style. And nowadays, there's really no point in doing that anymore. You shouldn't try to outsmart the engine and writing your code in a particular way because you read somewhere in 2014 on Hacker News that it's faster. Nowadays, you can just focus on writing modern, readable code, maybe use some modern language features, and let us worry about making it fast for you.
That's a good promise.
Yeah, I mean...
Okay.
I have one more, sorry. You're definitely passionate about web standards and compliance and all that. I've noticed, and I've heard complaints about this in the past, mostly on Twitter, that if you look at Google Docs and Google Slides, that they often break compatibility with different browsers than the Chromium engine. More specifically, that some features like just suddenly stop working in like Firefox or Safari, and that they don't pay a lot of attention to it, are some of the complaints that are often voiced. Is this something that you care about, or that you're like a part of in some way?
Yeah, I mean, I do have strong feelings about that. I think that's just bad web design. If you
Like the emoji's not working full screen.
I mean, that's a whole another problem. But yeah, I think if you make any kind of website nowadays, the goal should be to support the wide range of browsers that people are using in the wild. And I also think when issues like this arise, it's not necessarily because of bad intentions or because they want to block other browsers actively. There was recently some Hacker News thing about this where a Microsoft intern said something. I'm not sure if that was really a Microsoft intern, and I'm not sure that was a true story, but like a lot of people took it to be true. And yeah, basically, yeah, sure, Google makes mistakes sometimes when they ship websites and they only work in one browser or maybe two browsers. And sometimes there's no good reason to do that. Sometimes there is a reason and then they don't share that reason. Maybe if there's a technical reason like a missing API, I think it would really help a lot if they would just say so. Like, if it doesn't work, at least tell me why it doesn't work. And this is something that we've been advocating for internally with the Chrome Web Deferral team. We've been reaching out to those teams and like making the case that, look, this is really not okay. This is not the web that we want to see. But yeah, it's something we're working on.
That's really nice. I appreciate the honesty.
Yeah, thanks.
Any other questions? No? Okay, then we're good. Thanks, Mathias, for your time. And
thanks for
he
inviting me.
flew over from Munich for being here, but he's also going to spend some time with his family, so enjoy also the holidays and stuff.
You
Thank
too.
you, Mathias.
Yeah.